The small-town garage in Springfield was no stranger to curious eyes. Locals often slowed their cars to gawk at the young woman in grease-stained coveralls, bent over engines with precision. Her name was Maya Torres, a 27-year-old female mechanic whose hands could rebuild a carburetor faster than most men could change a tire. But Maya wasn't known only for her mechanical skills. Behind her calm brown eyes and quiet smile lived a history few dared to believe, a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu earned after 10 years of brutal training. One evening, as the orange sun dipped low and cast shadows across the garage's open bay, a group of men wandered in. Among them was Jake Harris, a local martial arts instructor and a self-proclaimed small-town champion. Jake was tall, broad-shouldered, with a cocky smirk that rarely left his face. He had heard rumors of Maya's unusual background and came with one goal, to test her. "Hey, grease monkey," Jake called out, his voice dripping with mockery. "They say you can fight. How about you show us a move or two?" The other men chuckled, elbowing each other like schoolboys egging on a prank. They expected a laugh, a blush, maybe even embarrassment. No one expected Maya to straighten her back, wipe her hands on a rag, and meet Jake's gaze head-on. Her voice was steady, almost amused. "Is that supposed to be a challenge?" The room fell silent. Jake smirked wider, sensing a chance to put on a show. "Why not? One little spar, unless you're scared." Maya dropped the rag, her expression unreadable. Inside, though, her pulse quickened, not from fear but from something deeper. She had walked away from fighting years ago, determined to build a quiet life. But something about Jake's arrogance, the men's laughter, and the doubt in their eyes awakened an old fire she had long buried. The air grew heavy with anticipation. The garage, usually alive with the whir of engines, now echoed with heartbeats and unspoken questions. Could a mechanic, a woman, really silence a black belt? Nobody knew that Maya's first move would not only freeze Jake in his tracks but also change the way everyone in that garage, and soon, the entire town, would see her forever. The Grandview garage sat at the edge of Main Street, its rust-red doors always open, the smell of oil and gasoline mixing with the sweet scent of honeysuckle that grew along the back fence. Inside, Maya Torres wiped the sweat from her forehead as she leaned over the hood of a Ford pickup. Her fingers were calloused, her hair tied back in a messy bun streaked with grease, but her movements were sharp, deliberate, and confident. Fixing cars wasn't just her livelihood, it was her way of keeping her father's memory alive. He had built this garage from nothing, and after his passing, Maya refused to let it die. Across town, however, her name was whispered with another kind of respect. Rumors floated through bars and gyms about the female mechanic who was once a fighter. Some claimed she had beaten men twice her size. Others dismissed it as a small-town myth. But those whispers eventually reached Jake Harris, a martial arts instructor whose pride was as broad as his shoulders. Jake had built his reputation teaching young men to throw punches and kicks, his black belt displayed like a crown jewel in his dojo. He was used to admiration, to having the upper hand, and when he heard about Maya, something inside him bristled. A woman mechanic who thinks she can fight. He laughed the first time he heard it, but soon that laugh turned into a plan. Prove her wrong, in front of everyone. That Friday evening, as the sun melted into a soft orange horizon, Jake and a group of his students strolled into the garage. Their footsteps echoed off the concrete floor, interrupting the steady rhythm of Maya's tools. She looked up, wiping her hands on a rag, her brows knitting together as she recognized Jake's smug expression. "Evening, Torres," Jake said, his voice carrying arrogance. "Heard you're good with your hands. But can you fight with them?" The boys behind him snickered. One whispered loudly enough for her to hear, "She probably can't even throw a punch without breaking a nail." Maya didn't flinch. She tossed the rag onto the workbench and leaned against the truck, meeting Jake's gaze. Her voice was calm, almost amused. "And what exactly are you asking me, Harris?" Jake took a step closer, folding his arms. "A friendly spar. Right here, right now. Unless, of course, you're scared." The words hung heavy in the air. The students' laughter swelled, their excitement buzzing like static electricity. To them, this was entertainment, watching their sensei humiliate the town's mechanic. But to Maya, it was different. She had walked away from fighting years ago, choosing engines over tournaments, but something about Jake's tone, the mocking in their eyes, lit a fire in her chest. She felt her father's voice echo in her memory. Strength isn't about proving yourself, it's about knowing when to stand tall. Her jaw tightened. Slowly, She stepped forward until she stood just feet from Jake. "Fine," she said, her voice steady as steel. "But remember, you asked for this." The garage grew silent. Even the sound of the crickets outside seemed to pause. The challenge was set, and the night was about to burn with sparks no one could forget. The crowd pressed closer, forming a rough circle around Maya and Jake in the center of the garage. Grease-stained toolboxes, tires stacked high, and the metallic scent of oil became the backdrop for what suddenly felt like a makeshift arena. The fluorescent lights above flickered faintly, buzzing like restless spectators themselves. Jake grinned, rolling his shoulders back, his black belt tied neatly around his waist. He had trained hundreds of students, fought in tournaments, and sparred with seasoned fighters. To him, this was a joke, a quick way to silence rumors. "Don't worry," he said, voice dripping with condescension. "I'll go easy on you." Maya remained silent. Her stance was relaxed, almost casual, but her eyes stayed locked on Jake's movements. Her heart beat steady, trained by years of discipline. She hadn't sparred in public since leaving the mats, but her body remembered every drill, every chokehold, every counter. The boys behind Jake egged him on. "Show her what a real fighter looks like." One shouted, "She won't last 10 seconds. Another added. Jake lunged forward, testing her with a lazy jab meant to embarrass, not hurt. He expected her to flinch. Instead, Maya shifted her weight, sidestepped with lightning precision, and before anyone could blink, her hand snapped up, gripping Jake's wrist. In one fluid motion, she twisted and swept his legs out from under him. The crack of his body hitting the concrete echoed through the garage like thunder. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Jake's smirk vanished, replaced with wide-eyed shock as he found himself flat on his back, staring up at the ceiling. Maya didn't gloat. She released his wrist and stepped back, her posture calm, her breathing even. The silence that followed was deafening. One of Jake's students broke the hush. "Did she just—" "No way." His voice trailed off, stunned. Jake scrambled up, his face flushed crimson, a mix of humiliation and anger. He hadn't expected her to react, let alone execute a flawless takedown. His pride stung more than the fall. "Lucky move," he muttered, brushing off his uniform, though his voice shook slightly. Maya tilted her head, eyes steady. "There's no luck. In training, Harris, only skill." The words cut deeper than the throw. Around them, the boys who once laughed now stood frozen, their expressions twisted in disbelief. Some glanced at each other, suddenly unsure of their sensei's invincibility. Jake clenched his fists, trying to shake off the weight of the moment. "All right," he growled, his tone darkening. "Let's see what else you've got." But deep down, even he knew, the fight had already shifted. He wasn't facing a mechanic playing pretend. He was facing a fighter, one whose silence spoke louder than his bravado. And though the night was young, Maya's first move had frozen not just Jake, but everyone watching. For the first time in years, Springfield's small-town champion felt the sting of doubt. Jake's jaw tightened as he squared his stance, brushing the dust from his uniform. The sting of humiliation burned deeper than the scrape on his elbow. He could still hear the gasp of his students, the look of awe on their faces as Maya had flipped him like a ragdoll. For Jake, this was no longer a joke. His pride, his reputation, everything he built in this town, was now on the line. "Enough games," Jake snapped, circling Maya with deliberate steps. His voice carried an edge that silenced even his rowdy students. This wasn't about showing off anymore. This was about proving dominance. Maya adjusted her footing, shoulders loose but eyes sharp. She could sense the shift in his energy, the way his muscles coiled, the simmering anger hidden behind his smirk. He wasn't here to spar anymore. He was here to win, no matter the cost. The tension was thick, almost suffocating. The air smelled of oil and sweat, the faint hum of a car engine in the corner providing the only background noise. Even the crickets outside had gone quiet, as if nature itself leaned closer to watch. Jake launched forward, faster and harder this time. His fist sliced through the air with precision. Maya ducked, weaving to the side, her boots scraping the concrete. She countered with a swift kick to his thigh, controlled but sharp enough to make him stumble. The crowd erupted in disbelief. "Did you see that?" She tagged him, one of the boys shouted. Jake's face twisted. The laughter that once fueled his confidence was gone, replaced by an unsettling silence. His students weren't cheering anymore, they were watching, wide-eyed, as the balance of power shifted. Fueled by frustration, Jake drove in again, this time with a flurry of punches. Maya blocked and parried, her movements fluid, almost dance-like. Years of training had drilled discipline into her bones, never fight with anger, always with control. Each strike she deflected built the tension, each dodge fed the fire in Jake's chest. Finally, he overcommitted, his fist swinging wide, his weight tipping forward. Maya seized the moment. She hooked his arm, pivoted on her heel, and sent him crashing to the ground again, this time harder. The impact rattled the floor, tools clattering off the nearby workbench. Jake groaned, struggling to rise. Beads of sweat dripped down his temple, his breathing heavy. For the first time, a flicker of fear flashed in his eyes. Maya didn't advance. She stood tall, giving him space to rise, her calm demeanor a sharp contrast to his frustration. "You don't get it, do you?" she said softly, but her words carried through the garage. "Fighting isn't about proving who's stronger. It's about control, of your body, your mind, your pride." Her voice struck deeper than her kicks. Jake's students shifted uncomfortably, some lowering their eyes, their faith in their teacher visibly shaken. The man they idolized was being dismantled, not just physically, but emotionally. As Jake rose, clutching his side, the truth began to set in. This wasn't a mechanic humiliating him. This was a fighter who had chosen humility over fame, and that made her more dangerous than anyone he'd ever faced. The fight was no longer entertainment. It had turned real. The garage air felt heavier now, thick with sweat, tension, and the weight of unspoken truths. Jake leaned against the hood of a car, his chest heaving, his pride battered more than his body. His students lingered at the edge of the circle, their earlier jeers gone, replaced with uneasy silence. For the first time, they looked at Maya not as a target of ridicule but as someone far beyond what they had imagined. Who are you, really?" one of the boys finally blurted, his voice carrying a mix of awe and fear. Maya exhaled slowly, her eyes softening. She hadn't planned to reveal her past tonight. But the truth had a way of clawing out when the moment demanded it. "I wasn't always a mechanic," she began, her voice steady but tinged with something deeper, memory, loss, regret. "I spent 10 years on the mats, training in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai, and Judo. I fought in tournaments, traveled, competed, I even won a few titles." The crowd stirred, disbelief flickering across their faces. Even Jake's eyes widened, his arrogance faltering. "But when my father got sick," Maya continued, her gaze drifting toward the dusty photographs hanging in the corner of the garage, "I came home. He built this place with his bare hands. Every bolt, every tool in here carries his sweat. He needed me, and I wasn't going to let him down. So I hung up my belt and picked up a wrench." Her words echoed in the silence, heavier than any punch she'd thrown. The students glanced at each other, guilt slowly replacing their earlier bravado. They had mocked her grease-stained hands, never realizing those same hands had once grappled, fought, and defended with the skill of a champion. Jake swallowed hard, his mind spun with images, this woman, younger, standing on podiums, holding medals, choosing family over fame. The very humility he had mistaken for weakness was in fact a strength he had never known. Why didn't you keep fighting?" he asked, his voice stripped of arrogance, softer now. Maya's expression tightened. "Because my father's life was worth more than any trophy. He passed a year later, but in his final days, he told me something I'll never forget: strength isn't about who you can beat. It's about who you can protect." Her voice cracked slightly, but she didn't look away. She wanted them to understand that her silence, her choice to remain in the shadows, was not weakness, it was sacrifice. The garage was so quiet now that the faint ticking of a cooling engine filled the air. Jake's students shifted uneasily, their admiration for their teacher faltering as Maya's truth struck them harder than any physical blow. Jake lowered his gaze. His pride, once inflated like armor, now felt hollow. "I thought you were just a story," he admitted. "But you're more real than any of us." Maya didn't smile, didn't bask in the sudden reverence. She simply picked up the rag from the bench, wiping her hands clean. "I'm not here to prove anything," she said quietly. "I fix cars. That's enough for me." But deep down, the fight had unearthed something she couldn't bury again. And the crowd sensed it. This wasn't the end of her story. It was only the beginning. The garage smelled of motor oil and rubber, but tonight, it carried something else: respect. The same students who had swaggered in with Jake now stood in silence, their eyes wide, their bravado gone. Maya had not only dismantled their teacher physically but also unraveled the arrogance that clung to them like a second skin. Jake, still sore from the takedown, straightened his back and faced her. His pride resisted, but somewhere deeper, beneath the bruises and sweat, humility broke through. He nodded slowly, the gesture awkward but sincere. You've made your point, Torres. I underestimated you. We all did. The words hung in the air like a confession, heavy but liberating. His students exchanged uneasy glances, as though the ground beneath their ideals had shifted. For years, they had admired Jake as the untouchable champion. Tonight, that image cracked, and through the cracks, Maya's quiet strength shone. One of the younger boys spoke up timidly. Can you teach us? Even just one move. The request caught everyone off guard. Maya blinked, her rag still in hand, and then looked at the boy's eager, frightened face. She sighed, shaking her head. I'm not a teacher anymore. I fix cars. But her voice lacked finality. The truth was, something in her stirred. Watching the awe in their eyes, she felt the familiar pulse of the fighter she had buried long ago. Jake let out a short laugh, though it carried no mockery this time, only respect. That's a shame. You'd put half the instructors in this state out of business. The group chuckled nervously, but beneath it was admiration. For the first time, Maya wasn't just the mechanic. She was someone who had faced down their strongest and proven that strength wasn't in belts or titles, it was in discipline, humility, and sacrifice. Maya turned back to her workbench, grabbing a wrench, as though to remind herself who she was now. Lessons over, she said quietly. But her words didn't dismiss them, it sealed the night into their memories. The students filed out slowly, whispering amongst themselves. Jake lingered for a moment longer. He rubbed the back of his neck, then extended his hand awkwardly. You've earned more than my respect, Torres. If you ever want to come back, the mats are waiting. Maya looked at his hand, then at his eyes. She shook it firmly but offered no promises. Some fights belong in the past, she replied. As Jake walked out, the garage grew quiet again. The sound of crickets returned, the hum of engines resumed, and the town outside continued its ordinary rhythm. But for those who had witnessed what happened that night, nothing would ever be the same. Word spread quickly. By morning, whispers became stories, stories became legend. Springfield would never forget the night a female mechanic humbled a black belt with a single move. Yet as Maya leaned over the next engine, the weight in her chest told her something she couldn't ignore. This wasn't the last challenge she would face. For every fight she avoided, destiny seemed determined to bring another to her doorstep. And somewhere beyond the horizon, an even greater storm was coming, one that would test Maya Torres in ways she had never imagined.